Hello and welcome to whatever the heck this is. Mostly it's me finally having access to a laptop and plugging my microphone in because I'm a bit bored. Now, if you're unaware, my PC died, or to be more specific, my main hard drive died out of the blue. I do have backups. I mean, most of my video stuff is on a separate drive anyway, so that's fine. But yeah, without warning, it just went kaput. And so what I did was order not one but two new hard drives. I've actually bought an SSD to put the OS on, along with probably World of Tanks and Warships and, you know, the up-to-date versions of those clients, and maybe a couple of other things like Photoshop. And then I also bought a replacement traditional platter drive to put everything else on, because if nothing else, all those old copies of Warships and World of Tanks do take up a fair whack of space. So that's all fine and good. That's actually arrived as of sitting down and recording this, but while I was in there unplugging things and taking out the old drive enclosure, I decided, you know what, I'll have a little clean around. So I did. I got out the Hoover and I got my I don't know what the name is, my air squoosher. I've got an air squoosher for my camera. It's for, you know, blowing dust off things. And I've had a puff around with that inside the case and dislodged some of the dust. And then I thought, you know what, I'll just take the CPU fan off and get the dust up from the bottom of that as well. And I did, and that was fine. Except then I realised I didn't actually have any thermal paste in the house, which I thought I did. So now I'm waiting for some thermal paste to arrive. It wasn't that good planning. Thermal paste, by the way, if you are unaware, is the goop that sits in between your processor and the CPU cooling fan to ensure that there is actually a physical connection. You don't want any air bubbles or gaps in there, because the processor will fry itself. You need something that's going to conduct the heat efficiently to the CPU cooler. So in theory I could just, you know, slap the CPU fan back in there and it, you know, be fine for maybe, like, I don't know, it'd be fine for a while, but then it would probably die, and I don't want to fry my PC. I've already had to spend not that much, but still a fair bit on replacing the drive and getting the SSD. So anyway, that's my tale of woe. That's why there haven't been any videos, because I can't make videos. But now I've been able to borrow a laptop off my parents, and that's fine. Can't do any playing of games, can't do any recording of videos, but it can at least run Audacity. And, you know, I can check emails and Twitter and all that kind of thing much more easily. So that's all good. So what I'm going to do is talk about a thing. I'm going to talk about a specific thing that I watched while I've been in this little hiatus. So if you were just here for an update and whatever, then that's fine. You can tune off now, and you know, I should be hopefully getting thermal paste in not much more than a few more days, and then I can start the process of reinstalling things and copying files over and seeing if the C drive is recoverable or if I have to go back to a slightly older backup. But anyway, yeah, hopefully that won't take too much longer, hopefully. But basically what I've been occupying my time with in the meantime is, well, threefold. I've started reading another book, which is, well, actually, no, you know what? I'm not going to tell you. You're going to have to wait until I finish it and do my video on it. I have been playing Assassin's Creed, is it Revelations? I think it's Revelations. It's the last one with Ezio, anyway, on my PS3. And I've actually been watching Netflix on my PS3 as well. And I've gone through a couple of things, watched a couple of films. I watched one anime series which was new to me, and I can't even remember what it was called. It was some kind of mecha anime, and it was alright, but it was too short. It was like 12 episodes, and it barely felt like anything happened. Let's see what else I watched. Star Trek Into Darkness. I watched Stranger Things, which just come out on Netflix and is actually pretty decent. Not spectacular, but it was solidly entertaining, and it was as an homage to a certain kind of 80s sci-fi. I think it was pretty well done. So that was worth my time. But the thing I'm going to talk about, the thing that just blew me away is Steins Gate, which is another anime. Now, I've mentioned this in the past. First time I saw it was last year. I watched the subtitled version. This time round, I watched the dubbed version, and it's actually a pretty good dub, because some anime are just terrible. Like the voice acting quality is so far off base of what the original intent was supposed to be, or it's a really bad translation or whatever, and the whole thing is just terrible. So most of the time I watch things with subtitles where possible, but in this case I thought, I've watched it with subs already, I'll give it a go with dubs. And it was pretty much, I mean, there were one or two things that weren't quite as good, but we're talking by like a gnat's whisker. It was, generally speaking, almost as good as the original subbed version. I'm actually in an interesting position at the moment, because Steins Gate itself, in fact, it's part of a trilogy of 3 games called the something trilogy, I don't know, the Adventure Science series or something. The first one, I can't remember what it's called. The second one is Steins Gate, and the third is called Robotics Notes. Now, they've all 3 of them had anime adaptations, but adaptations is your clue there. They are all actually, in fact, visual novels. Now, if you're unfamiliar with that term, a visual novel is basically an interactive visual storybook thing that's, has some semblance of being a video game, in that a lot of them have branching choices, or there's, puzzles, there's some level of interactivity, but the vast majority of your time is spent sitting reading words on the screen, and they'll usually be voice acted, and maybe they'll have a little bit of animation here and there, but generally speaking, it's sitting looking at pictures and reading stuff. Now, I've played about 9 hours-ish of the visual novel, which doesn't even take me to the halfway point of the series, which is 25 episodes in total. It's actually quite a long one for a single series, but from what I've read, with the visual novel, you can get through it in about 20 hours, and the series itself is a little bit less than 10 hours. So what they've done is they've taken a lot of the exposition stuff that's in the visual novel, and they've just trimmed it out completely, or else they've compressed it to quite a large degree. And what this means is there's a lot of stuff that's in the visual novel that's quite interesting, but it's very slow paced. Whereas in the anime, because they've been able to trim all this stuff out and condense it down a bit, the pacing is generally a lot better, but the first half is still, it's a lot of lead up, it's a lot of character development, it's a lot of exploring the scenario that's presented. Because what Steins Gate is about is time travel. Now, there's a slight element of Groundhog Day in there, maybe. I could possibly say that. But the thing about Steins Gate is that even though it's an anime, it's a time travel sci-fi show that, as long as you had some interest in sci-fi and the idea of watching an, air quotes, cartoon doesn't turn you off completely, it's a really good story, and it's a really good sci-fi time travel story. And I think for a lot of people, there's certain things about anime that they just don't like. There's various kind of tropes, if you will, that are associated with anime. And Steins Gate does once or twice do things. There's one bit where somebody bursts in on somebody in the shower for no real reason other than, to titillate the viewer a little bit. And there's probably one or two other examples like that, but by and large it avoids the tropes, the weird stuff. It could very easily be turned into a live action show. It's not something like what else did I watch that was good? Kill la Kill, for instance, which I think I watched that last year at some point. Fantastic, mad show, but it would only work as an anime. You could not make a live action of Kill la Kill. It just would. I can't even begin to conceive how that would work. So it's a very solid plot, basically. You've got these 25 episodes, and it's kind of in 2 major parts. Like I've said, you've got this roughly the first half where it's all of this character build up, and in particular you get to know the main character, I guess you'd call him, who is, well, he goes by two names. He's got this interestingly split persona, which is not a thing I at all would be familiar with. But he's this college student called Okabe Rintaro. But he's got this mad scientist persona called Hohoin Kyuma, and he just basically insists all his friends call him this. And at times, especially in the visual novel, he almost comes across as being unlikable, like really sort of arrogant about it. Like he kind of he's not nasty, but he's a bit up himself. And there really is an element of you just got to stick with this first half, this slower paced first half, because when I first watched it, I think it was about over the course of at least 2 weeks, if not 3 weeks, to watch the first, like this first half. I'm not going to say how many episodes exactly, because that would maybe spoil. I'm trying to really stay spoiler free here. But yeah, I got to about the first half of it, and then there's this turning point, and it just goes off the rails. It drops the mic, it kicks into high gear, and really takes off. And so the second half of the series I watched over the course of, I think, like a day and a half, 2 days, after, spending 2.5, 3 weeks watching the first half. So yeah, it suddenly, at about this halfway point, just massively flips on its head, and all of this character development and all of this plot development suddenly just kicks into high gear, and it just pays off so massively over the second half of the series. And you really get a sense of how far, and this is where the Groundhog Day bit comes in, because there is this element of repeating the same kind of cycle over and over again, at least for a good couple of episodes. But you really start to see Okabe's character like change. You start to see some cracks appear. In fact, you start to see, maybe, I don't think cracks is quite a strong enough term for it, but he really does start to break as a person. It just gets to him, because there's this particular reason why he is jumping through this kind of closed loop of time over and over and over again. I'm not going to say why, because it'd be a massive spoiler, but the character development that comes out of that is quite something. And it's not just him, it's other characters as well, but his is the biggest change that you see. Now, it's not completely 100% flawless, this show. There's one or two of the characters that like there's Mayuri, who is this childhood friend of Okabe, and in the Japanese, like, they've got some really, she's only supposed to be like 2 years younger than him, maybe. She's still in high school, but she's just, I don't know, she comes across as being really immature. And it was actually interesting, because in the in the dubbed version, they'd gotten somebody, and it was more or less the same lines, but they'd actually gotten somebody who made her sound like a different sort of character, just by sheer dint of the way they presented those lines, if that makes any sense. But in the subbed version, yeah, she could be considered annoying by some people. And you've got other things like Daru, who's like another friend of Okabe, who is just this fairly stereotypical otaku type character. But he's also quite central to moving the plot forward, because he's got all these elite hacker skills. And indeed, there's a running joke that they actually reasonably well translated into the English dub about him. Okabe keeps calling him a super hacker, and he says, "No, it's hacker." And then they in the English they translated that to be Okabe keeps calling him hack, which I'm not sure it quite works the same, but it probably, like, the subtitled version probably doesn't quite do the Japanese justice. There's actually a lot of other things that the dub does pretty well as well. There's a lot of, I don't know if you want to call them nerdy references, or I found it quite witty the first time I watched it, but there's a lot of references to things like, I believe it's, is it 2-channel? Or the in-universe equivalent. They've kind of fictionalized a lot of things. So 2-channel becomes @channel, and IBM becomes IBN, stuff like that. But there's a lot of these kind of references to real-world things that have just been, changed like that just a little bit. But what they did, I mean, they more or less kept that, again, for the dubbed version, but I don't think it quite worked the same. Not quite. Although there was one funny moment where they make a reasonably decent Star Trek reference. But if you didn't know Star Trek at all, it would probably sail right over your head. I'm trying to think if there's really anything else to say about this that I can say without spoiling it, because I don't think that there is. It's one of these animes that consistently pops up in people's, top whatever of anime. And given the rate at which, shows get pushed out, there's, I don't know how many new shows come over even to like the English subversion version every year. How many, out of how many must come out in Japan? Because it's television. They axe the unsuccessful series, and they push out new series every year, and do a lot of adaptations of mangas and whatever. But it's like, even though this came out in 2009, you still see it a lot of these lists. This is a 7-year-old series, and it's still fantastic. It's absolutely wonderful. So I would absolutely endorse all those lists that have Steins Gate on them. It is a really, really good show, and I highly recommend it. Even if you have a particular dislike for anime, this one doesn't. Like I said, it doesn't do a lot of like anime things. There aren't people flying around in mecha suits or anything like that. It's just a very solid sci-fi time travel story with some really good characterization and some fantastic moments in it. And of the three, because like I said earlier as well, there are adaptations of all 3 visual novels. The first one, I can't even remember what it's called. It was okay-ish. Kinda. I can barely remember the plot. It involved somebody going around killing things, and there was magic or something. I can't remember. Robotics Notes was a bit more interesting, and there's actually a direct connection between Steins Gate and Robotics Notes, because the daughter of one of the characters in Steins Gate turns up as a character years older in Robotics Notes, actually as an employee of the Japanese Space Agency. And Robotics Notes does maybe revert a bit to type in that they are building a giant robot as a school project because Japan. So that required a little bit more suspension of disbelief. It had some decent moments. They did some nice plot stuff with augmented reality, like a lot of one particular strand of the plot involved the main character wandering around with his phone trying to find clues on the island where he lives. And he was having to do this with his smartphone, his smartphone camera, and wandering around and having to solve various real life puzzles to unlock information. And that part was interesting. There were 1 or 2 other bits that were really interesting, but it just, in terms of quality, like, Steins Gate is head and shoulders above both of them. And I think it's probably, a large part of it is that the fact that they gave it 24 episodes properly plus a prologue. It's not a prologue, a postlogue. It is properly 24 episodes, but the other 2 are on either side, I think like 12, 13 episodes each. So it gets a lot more room to stretch its legs. It gets a lot more time to build up the characters, and then when that flipping point comes in more or less the middle, it just turns everything on its head. And it's like suddenly it goes from they're kind of like mucking around, and they just start to realize the seriousness of the stuff that they've uncovered, the conspiracy that they've uncovered. And then it just goes from 0 to 60 in terms of like suddenly everything gets really very, very real all at once. So anyway, yeah, this has just been me rambling about an anime for close on 20 minutes because I'm bored and I can't record gameplay videos on this laptop. I can barely record, it's actually struggling. I'm sitting here watching it. It's actually struggling with Audacity a little bit. I think rendering this as a video, I'm probably going to do it at 720p. It's going to take a while. I predict at least an hour, even though this is it's literally going to be an MP3 file and 2 JPEGs will comprise this video, and it's still going to take it out, so there's no chance of me recording gameplay stuff on this laptop, unfortunately. But like I said at the start of the video, the thermal paste should be here reasonably soon, and I can start getting my PC back on its legs. So in the meantime, if you've enjoyed this emergency slice of rambling, you can hit the like button, you can leave any comments below, you can sub to my channel if you haven't already, and as always, stay tuned for more.